Namaskar everyone, this is Arpita and you're watching me on Think Tank India with me, my co-host Dr. Vasudha, and today we have a very special guest, much respected Professor Jeffrey Long. He's a professor of religion, philosophy and Asian studies in Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania, USA. So Namaskar Professor, welcome to our channel Think Tank India.
Namaskar and Dhanyabad. Thank you for having me.
So, sir, I just want to know that you have received an award on Ahimsa. So, for to promote the non-violence,
Yes.
and through your scholarship in 2022. So, if you could enlighten us about this.
Yes. So that award, I was very privileged to receive that award. It came from an organization called the International Ahimsa Foundation. They are primarily a Jain organization, and I've done a good deal of scholarship on the Jain tradition. I wrote a book about a little over 10 years ago, an introduction to Jainism. And a lot of my work has focused on something called Anikantvad, that is the giant philosophy of the complexity of existence. And it involves the idea that any topic we can see from many different points of view. And there's a very famous Indian story of the blind man and the elephant, which illustrates this idea that we all describe things based on our understanding and our experience and our perspective. And when we encounter someone with a different point of view, that doesn't mean that they're wrong and we're right, or they're right and we're wrong. It means reality is complex and we can see it in many ways and we can learn from each other. And in the contemporary Jain tradition, many Jains see this as a kind of intellectual reflection of ahimsa, that one way of showing love and kindness and compassion to others is also to respect their view, even if we don't completely share it. And so a lot of my work has been involved in promoting this, and also just knowledge of the Jain tradition and of Indic traditions generally. And so I assume that's why I was selected for the award. No one actually ever told me why I was given the award, but that I assume that is why. And was given at a ceremony at the Indian consulate in New York, and I live fairly close to New York, and so it was a great honor and a great privilege. And that award has been given to some very a very prestigious group. The Dalai Lama was given this award. Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa was given this award, and Prince Charles, now King Charles, was given this award. I don't think I'm in that category of people. It's also been given to many Jain leaders, laypersons, people in the community who've done things for the community. So, to me, it was a very big honor. And it was also an opportunity to speak about nonviolence. I had just co-edited a book called Nonviolence in the World's Religions with one of my colleagues. His name is Michael Long. We're not related. We just happen to have the same surname, but we co-edited this book on nonviolence in the world's religions. Many different authors wrote, and so this is a topic that's very dear to my heart, because I think it's obvious. Like, we live in a world where there is too much conflict, too much violence. We need to create a more humane world for each other as human beings, and also for all the other living beings with whom we share the planet. So I think this is something that is very meaningful to me, and I'm grateful to have gotten that award.
Thank you. And so my next question is that why Professor Jeffrey Long became an ardent follower of Sanatani culture?
So that is a long story. I'm not sure how long you want me to speak about it, but
Actually,
I'll
it's my query. Actually, it's my query from my academic life that I wanted to ask you.
Right, right. So for me, this is it's part of my academic life. It's my profession, but more importantly for me, it's a very personal thing. And so the short version of the story is Like most Americans, I grew up in a Christian tradition, specifically from the Roman Catholic Church. So that's my background religiously, and I still have great respect for the Catholic Church and for the Christian tradition. However, my father passed away. He was in a really very bad accident, and when I was 12, uh, he lost his life. And this was a very devastating experience for me and for my family. And so I started to think very deeply about, I guess you could say, big philosophical questions. Why do we suffer and die? Is there any meaning to all of this? What happens after we die? Is it just the end? Christianity talks about heaven and hell, but there were aspects of that that I didn't really agree with. It did not really make sense to me. And I became aware of Sanatana Dharma and Hindu culture, um, originally through American popular culture. Most people have heard of the Beatles, right? The rock band, the Beatles. You know, they were interested in meditation, and George Harrison, especially. This became a big part of his music, and so I found that interesting. The famous movie by Richard Attenborough, Gandhi, came out when I was around 13. I saw that. That fascinated me. So all of these things were sort of pointing toward India. And then I had this really funny experience where I was in at a sale that was in the it was in the parking lot of a church. It was like an open air market, and I came upon a copy of the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, and it was the version by Prabhupada, the ISKCON version with the very beautiful illustrations. I picked it up, and there was this picture, this painting of a man who had died, and his family surrounding him, and they were all in mourning. And from a distance, there is a monk who is observing them very dispassionately, and he sees Krishna, he sees God in the hearts of all of them. And below that, there was a quotation. It said, "The wise lament neither the living nor the dead," and it gave a page number. And I turned to it, and it was the part from the second chapter of the Gita where Krishna is explaining to Arjun that the body passes on, but the soul continues, the Atman continues. It takes on a new body, it changes bodies just like we change clothes, and there is nothing to fear from death. And this made so much sense to me. It was, I really, it spoke to me in a very deep way. And so I bought the book and started reading it. And I guess a really short version of the story is I just continued from there. I started reading everything I could find. Um, I actually met an Indian family in the small town where I was growing up. A few years later, I was in high school, and one of their children needed tutoring in math. So I was the math tutor, but then I got to know this family very well. They were a Gujarati family. They did puja every Monday, so that I would come over to their house. They would have vegetarian food, and we would do puja, and I just loved it. I felt like I was really at home with this. And so I went to I went to university. I went to a Catholic university for undergraduate. Went to University of Notre Dame, great Catholic university. But I really realized there that my worldview was very much in sync with Hindu traditions, much more so than with the Christianity. And then I decided to study Indian philosophy in graduate school. That's where I met my wife, who is from India, who grew up Hindu. We were married. We had a Hindu wedding. We were married in Delhi in the Arya Samaj tradition. So I joined the Hindu tradition through that, and so that's been my personal path. And on a professional level, I decided I wanted to spend my time studying these things that I find so important and so fascinating. And I might as well make a living from it. So rather than do something else and be bored, I was very fortunate to get my degree, got a job teaching at the small college where I teach now. Taught here for the last 23 years, and enjoy it. I enjoy sharing these things with people, and students are very interested. American students don't know much about India on the whole, but they are fascinated. Once they learn a little bit, they want to know more. And so I have a lot of good students here, And so, yeah, I feel very, very fortunate to be involved in this career and doing what I'm doing.
Okay. So, from that ancient period, India has contributed the world to the innumerable things that Aryabhatta's zero to present day's COVID vaccine. So, to the mankind, what is your opinion about the Indian contribution to the mankind and to the world?
Oh, I think it's enormous. I mean, I think that you could write many, many volumes about India's contributions to the world in the areas of culture, in the areas of science, mathematics, art, any number of things. India has contributed insights and knowledge and technologies to the world. And of course, it has also received things from the world and then transformed those in all kinds of interesting ways. And I think we will be greatly impoverished as a human species if we don't acknowledge and learn from the knowledge that's been there in India for such a long time. Particular areas that I think that interest me. It's not limited to this, obviously, but people in ancient India really explored the boundaries of consciousness, the nature of the mind, and concepts which have been sort of rediscovered or relearned in the West relatively recently. Even ideas which we now take for granted in the West, like the idea that there is an unconscious mind, for example. The idea that there are many levels of consciousness, many levels of mind, has been known in India for thousands of years, right? It's described in the Upanishads, it's described in so many places. With the Yoga Sutra and with other similar texts coming from India, we have not only descriptions of the mind and consciousness, but also specific techniques, practical techniques through which we can experience higher levels of consciousness ourselves. And I've always been very impressed by the fact that in the Indian traditions, whether it's the Vedic traditions, whether we're talking about Buddhism or Jainism, that faith is important, belief is important at a certain stage, but the ideal is that through practice, we actually have experiences and learn these things directly for ourselves. So we move from belief to knowledge. So that there are some things that you can experience directly through practices like meditation, and they're no longer theoretical. At least for you, right? At least for the practitioner, it's no longer a matter of faith or belief. It's like, well, I know this because I experience it every day when I sit down to meditate, right? So when you have these experiences and that these practices make available to you, there's something I would say in a not in the technical sense, but it's very scientific in a broad sense, right? It's systematic, it's experimental, it's empirical, and so I think this whole approach to mind and consciousness is really important, and I think that that has not yet been fully explored and appreciated in the wider world. I think there are depths there that are yet to be really fully understood. But it's beginning. Like you can even see Western psychology appropriating a lot of concepts of mindfulness and meditation and so on. So this was all very advanced in India, and this is just the area that I'm interested in. Philosophy, too, of course, epistemology. That is the nature of knowledge. How do we acquire knowledge? And there's very sophisticated concepts like the pramanas, our foundations for how we know something. And this is all very highly developed and debated extensively in Indian philosophy. And then, of course, you have all those other areas like mathematics and medicine and so on. And sometimes I think people get a little over enthusiastic and they want to say, well, they had, atomic bombs in ancient India and things. I'm personally skeptical about that, but I don't think you even have to go to that area, right? I mean, there is so much that's absolutely uncontroversial that is there in ancient Indian sources that again we've barely begun to scratch the surface. There are whole libraries in India of texts that have not yet been translated into any non-Indic language, and preserving these things and learning these things. That there's enormous knowledge I think there still to be had.
Okay. You have told about Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita's philosophy shows us the eternal truth of ancient India, and that was totally humanitarian. And like this, all other in ancient India takes in search of serenity, calmness, and permanence. So how for the theory is relevant to this world? Like we can see the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and and any other neighboring countries.
Right.
So how for this theory is relevant for in present world?
So I think it's very relevant for us at an individual level, right? When we talk about nations and nation states and warfare, then you're sort of getting into the area of Arthashastra, and there's a lot of wisdom there as well for politics and for international affairs. One quick comment I'll make on Arthashastra, which I think is always really impressed me, is that uh, it does not present a utopian ideal, right? That if we do X, Y, and Z, everything will be perfect and there'll be no more conflict, because there is a realistic understanding that in samsara, right, in this world of time and space and rebirth where we reside, this is not where perfection occurs, right? So it presents an idea of I call it conflict management rather than conflict elimination. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom to that. That there are ways of reducing violence and reducing conflict that may not eliminate conflict, because we'll probably never eliminate conflict, but there are many, many steps that can be taken to reduce it. Now, when we come to the individual level, this is where I find texts like the Gita to be most relevant. I mean, I think there is relevance to the larger society, but as we, each of us, go through this life, and we experience conflict and we see the problems of the world and we ourselves suffer various traumas, various losses, and so forth. I think this philosophy is a way of maintaining one's mental equilibrium, one's sense of hopefulness and optimism. And optimism, not meaning that, again, not an unrealistic thought that everything's always going to be okay, but the ability to accept things that happen that are beyond our control. Of course, whatever we can control, we control, but there are things that are beyond our power, like death. Right? This is an inevitable fact for all of us. So we could become full of sorrow about that. We could lament and think that life is meaningless. But then, how do we exist from day to day? How do we maintain our sanity, right? And so I think the kind of philosophy you find in the Gita, the kind of philosophy you find in teaching of the Buddha, in the teaching of the Jain tradition, of these multiple traditions, the Gita especially speaks to me. It is one that allows us to survive and endure the difficulties of this world, and to do so even cheerfully, and free as much as possible from fear and from anxiety. And I think that some of this at one time would have sounded very idealistic, but in light of the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns, all of the experiences that people had over the last few years, the prevalence of death and suffering during this period, I think has made people aware that you really do need a philosophy like this to survive, right? To endure. So many people have now, certainly in America, but I suspect it's all over the world, have emerged from the last couple of years with a lot of mental health problems and issues, because people have not been taught to be alone with themselves. Right? The isolation, the social isolation, is something many people felt very troubled by. Now, it's important to have friends and social interaction, but it's also important to be able to be alone with ourselves and our own thoughts. And I think the Gita teaches us how to do that, right? To maintain a calm mind. And my own guru, my own teacher in the Vedanta tradition, wrote a piece back, at the height of the pandemic, saying, this is really an opportunity. If you're in lockdown, you can meditate. You will not be disturbed or distracted. You can be alone with yourself and reflect on these things. And he said the pandemic is only making more evident what is always the case. There's always death. There's always disease. There's always the precariousness of life. But if we can learn to be with that mentally and to learn to accept it and see beyond it, right? That there is a higher self, there is a higher consciousness, there is something that transcends all of this, and it's within each of us. This gives so much hope, right? And I'll tell you a funny story. At the height of the pandemic, there were religious groups in America that were very angry because they were not able to have gatherings, right? Because of the COVID restrictions. And so an organization contacted me because they know I'm a religion professor, and they said, "We're advocating for people to have these gatherings, and we think that our religious freedom is being violated. And would you be willing to say something about that or write in support of us?" Or I wrote back to them and I said, "Well, I'm happy to contribute something." I said, "But I don't think that you'll really find it very helpful." I said, "Because in our tradition, we're saying this is a great time to be alone and meditate and focus on our individual, spirituality. And so we don't require these big gatherings, right?" And they said, "Thank you very much," and they never asked me for any, for any further contribution. They had a very kind of social understanding of what spirituality was. And again, that's not wrong, but you also need this solitary practice. And this is something I think it's really been perfected in India. And I often feel that in the Western world, um, we're very individualistic. And so people will often go to religion for a social experience. And my time from living in India taught me that in India, you're always with people. Spirituality is when you can be alone, right? Only time no one will disturb you is if you're doing puja or you're doing meditation. Then no one will disturb. Rest of the time, okay, we need to make tea and do things. So I think this idea of solitude is really very a very important one. That um, we cannot begin to know the self and the mind and our own consciousness if we cannot be alone with ourselves and experience that directly. So rather than fill our lives with distractions, I think the Gita is telling us to focus single mindedly on that divinity within. And then that makes it easier when you do go out into the world to deal with everything, right? Whether it's a pandemic or politics or warfare, it makes it easier to endure when you know that behind it all there is that Atman, which is unchanging.
Sir
So, Professor,
Navadvipan
is uh,
is saying
I
you the namaste. Navadvipan, maybe your student saying you
Uh,
namaste.
that's actually an organization. It's an academic um, group. They have that's kind of like a WhatsApp group, and I subscribe to them. So I guess they must be listening today. So very happy. Namaste.
Namaste from our side also.
Yes.
Sir,
yes, sir. I just
Iskar
want
and
to
okay. First, Peter, then
uh,
I'll ask.
just a quite fun knowledge. That Ram Setu is told, it's been told that it's a man-made, and the Pushpak Vimana that is mentioned in Ramayana, it is
Mhm.
possible that ancient culture that 7,000 years ago, how to create flying machine and to traverse the sky beyond the technologies. So that NASA engineers are still trying to harness today.
Mhm. Mhm.
So what's your insight about it?
Okay, so well, I'm not an engineer, so my insight is in this context is a layperson's insight. Um, uh, until we actually find an ancient flying machine, I'm a little skeptical about some of the claims that are sometimes made about ancient technologies. However, I think we should not be completely dismissive because the fact that such a high degree of technical and mathematical knowledge is evident in the ancient texts that describe these things is really quite remarkable. And it shows how advanced human thought was in ancient times and in India in particular. And in fact, I would connect this with what I was saying earlier about the mind and consciousness, that the kind of mental cultivation that is possible through techniques like dhyan, right, like yoga and so on, that these can enable great feats of intellect. One thing that India is very famous for is people being able to memorize vast amounts of text accurately, being able to do things like calculate the value of pi to some very, very, incredible number of decimals, and just mentally, right? There are so many accounts of Indian mathematicians, Indian, and even just young people in villages, carrying around vast amounts of knowledge. And I think this is connected with the culture of mental cultivation that's been there in India for such a long time. And I think some of the proof of that is these very advanced texts that describe how, say, a flying machine could be constructed. And what is given there is a lot of it is perfectly valid and very sound engineering and mathematics. Again, whether these were actually built, I'll just say I don't know. But the fact that the knowledge was there, that the concept was there, is really very impressive. And I think that not only India, but globally, we have a tendency to look down upon the past. We assume everything was primitive because we have this idea of progress, right? That everything gets better. But of course, in India, there's been the reverse idea that things get worse, right? You start with the Satyuga, you end up with the Kali Yuga, right? Things get worse. My own view is that neither progress nor decline is inevitable. These are all dependent, they're all contingent on our human actions and our choices. And as far as we can tell, people were as smart in ancient times as we are. The human brain is not changed too dramatically in that period of time. So if we can develop rockets that can go to the moon and Mars now, people then were as smart. And you just have to look at the temples in India, the pyramids of Egypt, Stonehenge in the UK, many, many similar sites in South America, in the Western Hemisphere. People developed very advanced things from a very early period. And I think what happens is as civilizations individually decline for a variety of reasons, whether it's disease or war or some internal dynamic that is self-destructive, that knowledge gets lost, it gets forgotten, and then it has to be rediscovered again and again and again. And again, I think one of the incredible things about India is how much has been preserved. It's a civilization with a very old memory and a lot of texts, things going back, and memories of things like technologies that, we maybe still have not been able to replicate. There's that incredible metal pillar in Delhi. It's an Ashokan pillar that I believe is not rusted in over 2,000 years. I don't think we're even capable of refining metal to that extent now, right? So that's right there, right? That's physical proof that kind of advancement was there. So yeah, I'm a little skeptical about some of the more grand claims that are sometimes made about ancient times. But I don't think we should be dismissive completely of the idea that people could conceive of those things, certainly. And it's an empirical question, right? If tomorrow an archaeologist digs up a Vimana, I'll be the first one to have a party and celebrate. But till then, I'm waiting for that to happen.
Thank you,
Sir,
Professor.
Iskana and Prabhupada makes the Vaishnava Gatha as the version of love and empathy for the devastated people of the world.
Yes.
What is your opinion about it? Actually, I am very fortunate that both Prabhupada and Swami Vivekananda, the two masters of Hinduism, I have the blood relation with them because Prabhupada was the maternal uncle of my grandmother and Swami Vivekananda was the maternal uncle of my grandfather. So I am asking you about the Prabhupada, then I'll ask you something about Swami Vivekananda also.
Okay, very well. I just want to say you are very fortunate to have that kind of genealogy. I mean, that is fabulous.
Thank you, sir.
It's wonderful.
Thank you,
And
sir.
so yes, and I think I'll wait until you ask me about Swami Vivekananda. I'll just say briefly that these philosophies of love and of knowledge, right, bhakti and jnana, I see them as complementary. And so on the love side, the bhakti side, right, this is where Prabhupada was completely focused. The love of God, the love of Krishna, and seeing and experiencing that love in everyone, right? That every living being, Krishna dwells in the heart of every living being. And this is the foundation of, I think, of ethics. Uh, every world religion teaches that we should treat others as we wish ourselves to be treated. But this idea that Krishna dwells in the heart of everyone actually gives a foundation to that. That if we literally see God in one another, then we treat one another as divine, right? And if you see one another as divine, you're not going to disrespect anyone. You're not going to mistreat anyone. And in fact, this whole practice of saying namaste and namaskar in Bangla is saying I'm honoring that divinity which is present within you. And I think this is something we forget at our peril, that we really need to see the divinity within one another and use that as the basis for treating everyone with dignity and with kindness. And of course, we meet people who are in whom it can be very difficult to see that divinity. There's many layers of something obstructing that, and they can be very difficult. And we have to maybe sometimes protect ourselves from that. But in general, I find that if we go through life with an open heart, with this philosophy of love, most people respond to it very positively. If we show love and kindness to others, if we treat others well, not everyone will respond, but most people will, because the divinity in them is responding to the divinity in us. And we want to cultivate that in ourselves and in how we treat one another, and see it in others also. And I would say one of the most important things I feel I've learned in my journey is that not to end a conversation with someone on a note of conflict or negativity, if possible. Because when I mentioned the death of my father when I was 12, the last thing I said to him was I was going out to play at a friend's house. And I said, "Dad, I love you." And he said, "I love you too, son." And I didn't know that that would be my last conversation with him. I came home a couple of hours later and he was gone. So I now feel like with everyone I know, I want to end on that positive note of love and kindness, because every conversation might either because they pass away, you pass away, these bodies are impermanent, but that divine love endures forever. And this is really, this is what I think is the essence of the Vaishnava teaching, the seeing that love and practicing it. And again, not only in relation to human beings, but all life.
Sir, tomorrow is Swami Vivekananda's 150th birthday.
Yes.
So at the World Religious Congress in Chicago, Swami Vivekananda spread the universal brotherhood mentioned by Sri Ramakrishna in his speeches. What is your opinion about it?
So I think Swami Vivekananda's coming to America was one of the most important events in world history. This is when people in the West were aware of India, of course, and there were people reading texts and so on. But here you have a living representative of this tradition and an inheritor of this wisdom coming and sharing it with the world. And I think it's significant that of the many, many teachings that he could have presented first, this was the one he focused on first, was harmony, universal brotherhood, the familyhood of all humanity. And the fact that in his welcome address, Swamiji said there were three great enemies of humanity: bigotry, sectarianism, and fanaticism. And that because of these, we had not made the progress that we could have otherwise made. And you think of all the times, like I said before, the civilizations have declined because of the rise of violence, fanaticism, and so on. And I think Swamiji really pointed the way to a future that we could all survive and in which we could all flourish. And again, there'll always be problems in the world. He taught that as well. But we could certainly make it better than we have if we attend to this philosophy and this teaching. So I think this is one of his most important teachings. And he not only taught it, he lived it, right? By leaving India, by coming to America, by teaching this to all kinds of people, right? Who many of whom had never heard anything like it before. Or sometimes maybe they had heard it through Christianity, but then if you hear something all your life, you kind of get used to it and it becomes background noise, right? So the meaning gets lost. So here comes this man from India with an orange robe, and he's saying this incredible thing, and it really sort of roused people's attention. And I think his welcome address at the Parliament of Religions is one of the great documents of world history, really. And he brings this teaching to the global stage.
Sir, why Beatles maestro and other eminent personalities like Julia Roberts, Hugh Jackman, and other followers of Hinduism? And on the other hand, we see the celebrities like Roberto Baggio and Steve Jobs are also the followers of Buddhism. So, why West is attracting Indian culture from the ancient time?
Okay, so I have many things I could say about this, but I think several come to mind. Many of the people you mentioned are celebrities, and I know the person in particular that I have been influenced by a lot is George Harrison from the Beatles. And if you look at many of these people, George Harrison, Julia Roberts, Richard Gere, of course, is Buddhist. They have achieved great material success and essentially reached the pinnacle of what is possible in terms of material success. You don't get more successful than the Beatles, right? That's the top, right? And yet they can reach that point and find they're still unhappy. They still have anxieties, they still have worries. The money and the fame have not made all of that go away, and in fact they've created new anxieties and new worries. And so, for people who have some spiritual sensitivity, and I think in the Indian traditions, we'd say that maybe they've had some rebirths where they have already been doing some of this work, they say there must be something more in life. And they encounter a teacher or a book. I know in George Harrison's case, he picked up the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, and he just saw the eyes, and it immediately, grabbed him. People, we all have our stories. For me, it was the Bhagavad Gita in the parking lot. Now, I did not come from a position of great privilege like these other people. I was just a child at the time and from a sort of working class background. But you come to a point where there is some crisis in your life, some suffering. Maybe it's brought about through fame and fortune, or maybe the death of a loved one, which was my situation. And the soul cries out for something. Right? There must be something more. There must be something deeper. And why Hinduism or Buddhism in the West, right? You can say, well, you've got Christianity. Why don't you just, read the Bible? And there you go. The problem is that what has happened in the West, this is just my personal view, is that two worldviews, two institutions have become dominant in the Western world. You have Christianity, and I have great respect for Christianity. Again, it's a very profound tradition in many ways. It's often presented in a way that is very dogmatic, and a lot of my students are young people who are sort of rebelling against that. It's rather than the depth of it being explored, it's you have to do this, you have to believe that, and if you don't, you're going to hell, right? You have this idea of a God who's going to punish you if you don't do every little thing right? So that is there. And then as a reaction against that, you have a sort of secular, materialistic, more science-based, I would say, understanding, which is atheistic and which sort of questions all of these things. And many of us, I think, in the Western world feel that we're not satisfied with these two alternatives. I have a friend who is a pravajika, a nun in the Ramakrishna order, and she once said about herself, and I would say the same thing about myself and about many of these people you asked me about. She said, I'm too religious for most scientific people and too scientific for most religious people. And so I sympathize with that as well, that, the the spirituality, the depth of understanding, and the hope we get from religiosity, but also the rationality and clear headedness and empirical approach of science. You want both of those together. And that's what many people find, I think, in philosophies like Vedanta and philosophies like Buddhism. It is a spirituality, it's offering something more than just this material world, but it's not demanding that you believe all of it or else you're going to go to hell, right? It says, well, try it for yourself, meditate, follow the practices, follow these ethics, live by this philosophy of love and harmony, and see what happens. And George Harrison actually said he wrote an introduction to a book by Swami Prabhupada, and he used this old English expression. He says, "The proof of the pudding is in the eating," and he was referring to his own practice of the mantra, right? The Hare Krishna mantra, the Maha Mantra. And for him, it gave him great bliss, and it took him to a place that was far more profound and satisfying than the kind of material wealth and success that he had at that point. So I think that's what attracts many people. It's a practical philosophy that takes you beyond materialism and scientific skepticism, but it doesn't ask you to surrender your reason and your rationality in the process. So that's my short answer. I could say a lot more, but that's
Sir, I'm asking you one thing, that today we are seeing that many people
Ravi
are
Shankar
going to.
said that
Okay,
oh, okay. Sorry.
okay, Orpita, you want to say something?
that I want to say that Ravi Shankar Sitar that changed George Harrison's life almost. He called him musical guru to Ravi
Yes.
Shankar.
Yes. Yes, and there are some wonderful
Mm,
stories about. I'll mention a story about George Harrison and Ravi Shankar that I think is very. It shows you how George Harrison was getting educated in the Indian philosophies and approach. Ravi Shankar was teaching George Harrison
yes.
at a very elementary level of how to play the sitar, and they were in George Harrison's house, and the telephone rang. And so this is before cell phones. So he had to get up and go to another room to pick up the telephone. So George Harrison stood up and he stepped over the sitar and then walked to the other room, answered the phone, spoke on the phone, came back, sat down to resume the lesson, and Ravi Shankar slapped him in the face. And George Harrison was horrified. Like, what did I do? Well, he had stepped over the sitar, and Ravi Shankar said, that instrument is God. He said that instrument is where this divine music is going to come from. You treat it with reverence and respect. You don't step over it like that. And it's just a very, very profound moment. I had another experience very recently, not related to music, but in one of my classes I was teaching, we were talking about how many Hindus will take the ashes of departed loved ones and immerse them in the Ganga at a holy place like Haridwar and so on. And a student asked a question about that, and she used the following word. She used the word dump. She said, "So when they dump the ashes in the river," and then I've now been immersed in this tradition long enough that I just instinctively recoiled when she said that, and I said to her, I said, "Let's say offered. Don't say dump. You offered the ashes." And then she understood, and it was fine. Okay, offered the ashes. So there's a whole sensibility about life that Ravi Shankar, I think, embodied with Harrison and represented, and that's why he called him his guru. And he really taught him a lot. I mean, he introduced George Harrison, in fact, to both of the traditions that Dr. Basuda is related to. He introduced George to ISKCON, and there's also some home video footage of George Harrison's where Ravi Shankar is taking George to Dakshineshwar, to where Sri Ramakrishna lived and was a priest. So connected to both of those traditions.
Sir, my question to you, that nowadays we are seeing that this is little bit political question, that
Okay.
at White House we are seeing every president are celebrating the Diwali festivals. Is
Yes.
this a gimmick, or is this a vote catching machine, or is this a real divinity they are showing?
It might be a little bit of all of the above. My analysis of it is that so America is a very diverse country religiously. Most people identify as Christian, about 80%, or maybe a little bit less now. But we have Jewish people, Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, people who are not religious. And every conceivable belief system is here. And some religions have developed in America, right? The Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, as they're called, that developed in America. Scientology developed in America, right? So we are a land of many, many religions, rather like India in that sense. And so I think the US presidents realized that it's important to acknowledge everybody's holiday, right? At one time, it would just be Christmas. You have the Christmas tree, and that would be it. And then they say, well, there are a lot of Jewish people, and of course, Jewish voters, right? Yes, so there is that political element as well. But there's a felt need to show respect. So then you have the menorah, and you acknowledge Hanukkah or some of the other Jewish holidays. And I think the celebration of Diwali, for me, what that illustrates is that the realization has dawned that Hindus are an important part of American life. And Hinduism is an American religion now. And some people might say, well, it's not a religion, it's dharma. And so I understand that. But in America, we have freedom of religion. Right? We don't have freedom of dharma, right? We use this term religion. And so this community and its tradition has now been acknowledged as part of the American tapestry of culture. So I see that as a very positive thing. Is there some cynical motivation, getting Hindu votes, getting Hindu donations? Oh, probably. But I think it's a good thing when we expand our public religion to be more inclusive. It shows that we're acknowledging the faiths of everyone, right? And of course, there are faiths that aren't included, uh, the, the more inclusive, the better. And I'm very happy at that development. And there's a Diwali postage stamp. You can get Diwali stamps in the U.S. now, uh, and Diwali's been recognized by Congress as a holiday, which means we don't all take off. It's not like India where every holiday everyone goes on break, but if a Hindu worker in the U.S. wants to take off work that day to celebrate Diwali, they're legally obligated to honor that. And same with the Jewish holidays, and of course the Christian holidays were always there. I think it's a very good thing. It makes America a more welcoming and inclusive place for Hindus. I've written about Hinduism in America. There's been a lot of hostility over the last 100 to 150 years directed to many, not only Hindus, but people who are not from America, people especially from India and from Asia more broadly. And it's good to see that there is also this current of inclusion and acceptance and welcoming. So I think it's a good thing, even if we have to be a little cynical about anything that politicians do. If they're doing something good, then we should commend that.
So, Professor, back to the Hollywood.
Yeah.
Recently, a Hindu diaspora can be seen in one of the commercially successful movie around the globe. That is James Cameron's Avatar 2. And
Yes.
there there he is influenced by the Vishnu Avatar,
Of
the
course.
blue
Yeah.
color.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, what's your opinion about it?
So yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, the term avatar itself is, of course, straight from the Hindu tradition, a descent, divine incarnation, and of course, we know that on the internet, avatar has come to mean that thing that represents you, right? So like your little picture on social media, that's your avatar because you're not physically in the internet, right? But that's your manifestation, right? And in the films, that's the usage of the term. So that some of the human beings exploring this planet of Pandora uh, have their consciousness sort of projected into these avatars, which are beings that look like the native people of the planet, and they're blue and they're large and they're strong, and they also represent they appear in a very idealistic way. They're at one with nature, and they're contrasted with the sort of materialistic consumerism of the human beings coming in. So I'm a science fiction fan. I love it. I enjoyed Avatar 2. I would say the story is very simple and maybe even a little predictable, but the visuals are just stunning, right? And if you see it in 3D, and if you have the good fortune to see it in a big screen like an IMAX or something, you feel immersed into the story, and it's really a very beautiful story. I think the connections with Hinduism are very tangential there. There is the idea of respect for all of nature, which you find, of course, in many traditions. It's quite strong in Hindu traditions. The blue, color of the beings, right, reminds us of depictions of Lord Vishnu in art, the word avatar. So definitely there are Hindu overtones in the film. The story, I think, is kind of a very traditional one in terms of science fiction. It's very common in science fiction to critique contemporary industrial society by engaging it into conflict with some alien society that is more advanced or superior. Or I know one of my favorite science fiction series were the Planet of the Apes films, where the contrast is with other non-human beings on our own planet that sort of rise up against the human beings. And so it's in a very old science fiction tradition, but yeah, it's got definitely a Hindu flavor, I think you could say, visually and conceptually to some extent.
Sir, my last question to you that nowadays a Hindu party someone says the Hindu party is ruling India. That is BJP. And
Mhm.
their leader is Sri Narendra Modi ji, our Prime Minister, beloved Prime Minister. So what is your opinion? Is he a Hindu leader or he is a development person? What do you think about him?
Well, I probably don't know enough about Indian politics to give a very educated answer. I know that there are a lot of very positive things that I've heard and read about him and things he's done in India. I know there are also a lot of criticisms and controversial things that I've heard. And so my suspicion when looking at all of it is that there's some truth in both sides, right? That he's a political person, and so I don't think that anyone is above criticism. I think your question, as I understand it, is he primarily promoting Hindu tradition or is he primarily promoting development? My sense is that both are an important part of his agenda, right? That I think it's essential for India to overcome poverty and to really sort of take its place in the world stage. And you can see him doing a lot in regard to that. And in terms of Hindu tradition, it's an interesting question because, like America, there's no one state religion in India, right? Both societies are secular in that very broad sense. So India is the home, like America, home to many religions. And so I think it's very important for the ruling party to make it a home for people of all faiths. And I know that Mr. Modi has supporters from all faiths, right? There are people from not only Hindus, but there are people from minority backgrounds who support him. He also has critics all across the spectrum. So I don't see it as the role of a prime minister to promote any one religion. I do see it, and this is where it becomes a very fine line, as important for a prime minister of India to respect and support Indian culture as a whole. And so there are ways in which Indian traditions have been disrespected. There have been ways in which things have not been fully appreciated. And I think that that is, it's important to develop that sense of pride and that, there really is a great civilization there. And so, in terms of an analysis, I would say that, history will tell, right? And so that's Might sound like a cop-out, but I'm not a political scientist, so my opinion is probably no better than just any person you would ask about that. But it's interesting to me. I follow the news and the developments. The perspectives you get are, like I say, they vary so wildly. It's like it's hard to know if they're even talking about the same person. So it's hard to make a judgment.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming our show, our channel, and we'll again invite you. And thank you once again
Thank you for
for your
inviting me.
time, valuable time.
Thank you, and thank you for everyone for listening to me rambling on. Hopefully, if a couple of minutes of it was useful, I hope so.
Sir, please convey to everyone to subscribe our channel, Think Tank India.
Yes, please do. Has everyone subscribed to Think Tank India? I've looked at some of their other programming, and there's a lot of very interesting, very intelligent conversation going on. So please do tune in.
And what your
Thank
conclusion
you,
note
sir.
for our channel?
So my conclusion is, well, gratitude for giving me time to speak and for asking me such interesting questions. Some of them are within my expertise, some are a little beyond, but I did my best. And I'm grateful to you for reaching out to me, inviting me to be a part of this conversation. So thank you. And if you ever want to invite me again, just let me know.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Namaste.
Namaste.
Good night, sir.
Good
Good
night.
night. And good, almost good afternoon here in America.
Yes, anyways.
Yes.
To you, yeah, it's quite late in India now. I mean, it's probably about 10:30 at night, isn't it? So,
Yes.
yeah. So have a good sleep. Have a good rest.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Have a
sir.
good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.